In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a quiz game with a graphical user interface and also integrate it with Gemini API to generate the questions and the options. We're going to be using Tkinter to make the graphical user interface, and this is going to be our final product. If we choose random questions like this, we have a score, we have the number of questions we're on, and once we reach the end, we're going to see the final score. And then there's a repeat function. If we click the repeat function, it's going to show up different questions, and this will keep happening until we close the game. Before starting the video, you need to install the Google Gemini AI library in Python. You can do that just by typing pip install Google Gemini in the terminal window, and then you just wait for the installation to finish. Now let's get started with the video. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a window. So first we're going to import Tkinter as TK, and then we're just going to create a window like this. Now if we run the program, we can see there's a window. To change the width and height of this window, we use the geometry function, and then we give it the width and height as a string. So we want 800 pixels in width and 600 pixels in height. If we run again, then we can see the window is bigger. Now I'm going to create a bunch of variables that we're going to need for the quiz. First one is going to be the background color. I'm going to name it PG, and then I'm going to make it black, but I want to control the shade of black, so I want to make it a little lighter, maybe like this. And I'm also going to create we know that we have 4 buttons, so I'm going to create a list of buttons. Let's keep it empty for now, and also a list of button colors. So button colors, and I'm going to give it 4 colors, of course, because we have 4 buttons. And let's just choose them randomly. Maybe this one is going to be red, this one blue, this one let's make it yellow, or maybe purple, and this one I'm going to make green. Okay, so now I'm also going to create the score variable. Let's make it 0, and also the current question index. So this is going to represent what question we're on. Then I'm also going to create the questions. Let's just make it an empty list that we're going to fill later. And now let's start creating the UI itself. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create 2 frames. Let's call the first one main frame. A frame is just a space that you can add stuff to. So we want a frame for the quiz and another frame for the final score. Basically you just call tk.frame, and then you give it the root window, call it root, and then we're also going to give it a background color. Let's make it same as PJ, and let's create the final frame 2 equals tk.frame root, and the background. Now let's create the components that we need for each frame. So for the main frame, we need the question label. So this is basically what will show the question on screen. Let's call tk label, and let's give it the main frame as the root frame, and then let's also set the text to something like question, and then let's also set the font to something a little big. So let's choose Arial and then give it 34 in size. Let's give it the same background as the frame, and we'll change the foreground to white. So this is basically just text color. So let's make it white, and then we also need to define the wrap length. This is basically like the length that the text is going to go. When the text is going to reach this length, then it's going to go back to the next line. So let's make it 700 pixels because we have 800 pixels in width. So we want there to be a little padding on both sides of the screen. We also need the info label, which will basically have the score and the number of the question that you're on. So let's create it in the same way. Label, mainframe, and you also need a text. So let's just make it something like score and go back to line, then question. We're not going to change the font, but we are going to change the background and the foreground. And that's it for this label. Now let's create the 4 buttons. So basically we're going to loop through 4 numbers. Okay. And for each one we're going to add a button to the buttons list. So tk.buttons, and we're going to give it the mainframe as the root. And the text, we're just going to make it something like option and then I. Let's turn it into string first, and we're not going to define, or actually let's also set the background to the button colors I, and then the foreground is going to be white too. So this basically just sets each button, and for the final frame we're going to have 2 labels, or 1 label and 1 button. So 1 label is going to be the final score label, and it's just going to be a normal label. Let's give it the final frame as the source or the root, and then the text, let's just make it final score, and we're gonna make the font big. So font equals, let's choose Arial, then make it just as big as the question, and same thing for the background and the foreground, it's gonna be white. And also the repeat button. So this is basically what we use to repeat the quiz, equals tk.button, and let's give it the final frame as the root, and text is going to be repeat, and foreground or background, let's just make it green, and foreground is going to be white. Now if we run the program now, then nothing is going to show on the window because we didn't really add these labels and buttons, we just defined them. And to add this stuff to the frames, we first need to use, I'm going to use the grid method. You can use any method, but I think for a quiz, the grid method is going to be ideal. So basically we're going to have 4 rows, or rather, 4 rows for the main frame and 2 columns. But for the final frame, we're just going to have 2 rows and 1 column. And the way you use grids in Tkinter is kind of needs its own video, so I'm not going to explain it in detail here, but I'm just going to show you what we're going to do specifically here. So for the main frame, we're going to row configure. This basically just adds rows to the frame, and I'm going to add 1 row, the first one 0. So you basically give the index of the row, and then you give the weight of the row. So we want the question row to be the biggest one, so I'm going to give it 3. And then for the buttons, that's the second and third row, so it's going to be mainframe.row configure, the second and the third. We're starting from 0, of course, so this is the first, this is the second and third, and the weight of this is going to be 2. And for the info label, we want there to be one row, of course, and it's going to have the least weight. So this is going to be 3, and the weight is going to be 1, because we want it to be the smallest one. And for the columns, we just do column for configure mainframe dot column configure, and let's just give it the 2 columns, so 0 and 1, and they both will have the same weight, which is 1. I also need to add one thing here, which is the minimum size. This basically limits the size of the buttons to be exactly, we want them to be 400. So if the text is small or big, then it doesn't matter. It's going to stay at 400 pixels in width for the columns, of course. And let's do the same for the final frame. We said we need two columns, so final frame dot column configure, or rather we need 2 rows and 1 column, so row configure 2 rows, so 0 1, and they're both going to have the same weight, so weight equals 1, and we need 1 column, so column configure 0 and the weight of 1. Now to add stuff to the frames, now we just need to specify the row and column, and then we just add them. So if we wanted to add the question label, we just say question label dot grid, and then we give it the row. We want it to be in the first row and the first column, but we want it to take 2 columns in width, because there's no other thing that we need to add in the first row, just a question label. So we need to take 2 columns, so we use this column span parameter and give it the number 2. So this basically just adds the question label, and it takes 2 columns in the first row. So if we run the program now, we need to add the mainframe to the root. So basically here we need to call mainframe dot back. This basically just adds the mainframe to the root window, and we also need to define 2 things here. The first one is fill, and let's give it k.both. This basically expand equals true. So this basically just expands the frame to fill the entire window in both directions. Now if we run again, then we can see that the question is showing, the question label. Now let's also add the buttons. So let's use this for loop. Buttons, that's I. We want to add it at the row. So the row is basically going to be, we need to just deconstruct this I, this index, into a row and column. And the way to do that is you divide it by the total numbers of rows, and then that's going to be your row. And then for the column, you need to get the remainder of that division by 2. So AI, we get the remainder when we divide it by 2. So this basically adds it at the right spot, or rather this loops through all the rows and columns of our buttons. And yeah, that's it, I think. Now if we run the program, of course, for the buttons, we need to start from the second row, so we need to add 1 to the rows. No, we need to add it here, 1 plus. If we run again, then we can see that our options are showing. Let's also add our info label. Yes, info label dot grid. Let's add it at this last row, so it's 3, and then the first column, but we also needed to take 2 columns, so we need to set this column span to 2. Now if we run again, then we can see our score label right here, but the buttons are not big enough. We need to make them take as much space as they can. So to do that, we also need to set another parameter. It's called sticky, and this basically just tells the component which way to stick. So there's 4 options. There's north, south, east, and west. So based on which way we want it to stick, then we add 1 letter to this string. So we want it to stick in all directions so it can fill everything. So let's give it all the letters. Now if we run again, then we can see that the buttons are taking all the space they can, but we also don't want that. We want them to leave a little bit of space so it looks nicer. So to do that, we need to define, or rather set two other parameters, which are bad x, which will add a padding in the x direction. Let's make it 20. And for the bad y, let's also make it 20. Now if we run again, then we can see that our options are looking pretty nice. We also need to change the font actually of the buttons. I forgot to do that. So for the font, let's make it a little bit bigger. Font equals Arial. You can use any font you like. I just like this Arial font. So let's make them 24. See how it looks. Okay, let's actually make them a little bit smaller, maybe 21. Maybe even smaller, 18. Okay, I think this looks good. Let's do the same thing for the final frame. So we have the final score label. Final score label dot grid. Let's add it to the first row. And of course the first column, because we have one column. And for the repeat button, we're going to add it to the second row. So grid row 1 and column 0. Now to show this final frame, I'm going to create a function that switches between frames. Or rather, let's make two functions, one for the final frame and one for the main frame. So let's call this function just final. And basically what it does is, first it removes the main frame. So remember this back function that we used here to add the frame to the root window? We're gonna use another function. So main frame, it's called back forget. So this basically removes the backend that we did. And then we're gonna back the final frame instead. So main final frame dot back. Now if we just call this function at the end here, then okay, let's define it above actually, maybe right here. So now if I run, then I'm going to see the final frame. But one thing we didn't use here is the fill and expand options. Let's just copy them, paste them here. If we run again, then we can see the final score and the repeat. I'm going to make the repeat stick to the north so it can look at in the middle here. So basically we're going to use the sticky parameter again. And we're only going to set the north, so north. And we're also going to make it a stick to, or let's just keep it as it is. So now it's a little bit small. Let's just increase the font actually. So the button, where is it? Final, or the repeat button. Now I'm going to set the font right here. So font equals Arial, and let's make it 24. Now if I run again, then you can see the repeat function right here, or the repeat button. Now for the main frame, I'm actually not going to define a whole function just for it, because we will define other functions too for the logic of the game. And I think I'm just going to include the main frame change in those functions. Now let me just remove this final function here. Let's not call it. And now I'm going to fill this questions list using the Gemini AI. If you go to the link in the description, which takes you to the documentation for the Gemini API, then you can find code for different programming languages that implement the AI. So we're going to copy the one for Python, and we're just going to paste it here. And one thing this code is missing is the API key. So you want to set the API key, and then to get the API key, you need to go to the Google AI Studio. And first you need to sign in. I think the sign up process or the sign in process is pretty simple, so I'm not going to explain it here. Once you're signed in, you will see this window right here. You're going to go to the get API key down here. And basically, if you have if you already have API keys, then you can just copy them. If you don't, then you can create an API key through this button right here, and you choose your default project, or rather any project you want. You can create projects too, and then you click create key and you will see it in this list. I already have keys, so I'm just going to copy one of them. Now if I go back to the where I was, then I can just paste it here. And another thing that I'm going to change is the model. There's actually a lot of models. If you go back to the studio page, you can see that there's this rate limits tab, and basically it's going to show you all your requests that you made, and for each model you have a limit. So some of them are not free, so you can see so you can see they have 0 limits. I mean, they have a limit of 0, so you can't even use them once. The others, like this one, has 20 requests per day. This is Gemini 2.0 Flash. You also have others, but you need to make sure they are text out models. Unlike this one, like the multi-model, they don't really make texts. So I'm going to choose this one. Actually, the reason why it's showing that it's full is because I'm on the this project. If I go back to the other one, oh, this one is also full. Then I think I'm going to use this one, the Gemini 3.1 flashlight. You need to get the exact name, the programming name for it. So I'm going to look this up. Code name for Gemini 3.1 flashlight. It's going to give me the exactly this one. So it's the ID. So it's Gemini 3.1 flashlight preview. This is what we're going to copy and put in our code. So I'm going to change this here to this, and for the prompt that we're going to give, we're going to put it in the contents parameter. And I already have this prompt. Basically, I asked ChatGPT to give it to me, which is kind of crazy because I'm asking AI to give me a prompt for another AI. But I think this is pretty good, actually. It's pretty structured, and it basically gives me a response in JSON. So I think that's easier to decode than just normal text. Basically, what we're asking the AI to do is generate exactly 10 random quiz questions and return only valid JSON. I'm also going to add a string at the end that has 10 to 15 word summary. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want this summary to exclude the questions. So if I ask the AI to give me 10 questions, then the next time I want to ask it, I don't want it to include the same 10 questions it gave me last time. So I'm going to use the summary as an exclusion text for the AI. Okay, so basically the JSON is going to have a question parameter, options, answer. The question is going to have just the question as a string. The options are going to be a list of options as strings too. The answer is going to be the index of the correct option, and the summary, of course, at the end. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this like this, and then go back here, and I'm actually going to define a prompt variable. I'm going to give it this, and then I'm just going to give it the prompt right here. Now if I just print out the response, so it's saying print response.txt. I'm going to run the program, see what happens. Okay, there's a problem. Yeah, need to go back to line. So if I run now, then hopefully everything will work. It's going to take some time because this model is kind of slow. And now we can see that down here the response was printed, and it has all the questions and the options answer, and then at the end it has the summary. I'm actually going to change this model because it's kind of really slow. And basically we need to decode this response using JSON. So I'm going to import it right here. Import JSON. And to decode the response, we basically just have to set the questions to JSON.loads, and we give it the response.text. But before I do that, I need to do a couple of things. So basically, if you know about this AI model, sometimes they respond the JSON text starting with this text right here. So if this is the case, then we want to remove this line that has this JSON initializer or whatever. So before we do that, let's just set response text to response.text. So this is going to be the raw text that we receive from the AI. Now we need to check if the text starts with if response text starts with this, then we want to remove the first and last line. The way to do this is basically we need to deconstruct this string, rather separate the string by its lines. So response text dot split, and split lines, and then we want to only take the first and we want to exclude the first and last line. So we're going to start from 1 because the first line is 0, and we're going to go all the way to the line before the last, so it's -1, and we need to join them again. So I'm going to add this at the start dot join, and we're going to give it all this text, and we want to join them by a line character. So basically what this does is going to split the response into a list of lines, and then it's only going to take the second to last line. Then it's going to join them again through this line character. Let's set the whole response text to this, and we're also going to call this function strip. This basically just removes any extra lines or extra spaces that we don't really need, and then we're going to give this response text to the JSON. So response text. Now if we print the questions, then hopefully it will give us a valid JSON response. So if I run again, I think I made a mistake here. Let me just change the model. So it's Gemini 3 Flash Preview. Just gonna copy that, put it right here, and then I'm gonna run again. And we can see that the JSON is printed correctly. Let's close our window. Now let's actually define the summary variable. So I'm going to do summary equals an empty string, and then let's put all of this into a function. So let's create a new function. Let's call it load, and basically what it will do is it will check if the summary is not empty. If it's not empty, then it's going to add something to the prompt, which is going to be this plus equals exclude these topics, and we're basically going to give it the summary. And let's make it into a new line, so like that. And let's make summary and prompt global. So global summary, global prompt, and let's also put this stuff into the function as well. Now after we got the response, we want to set the summary too. So summary equals, it's going to be the last element of the questions, and we're going to use the summary label. So this basically will set the summary to summary that was in the response. Let's also make questions global. Now we have our questions loaded once we call this function. So let's just call it first thing. Now, once the questions are loaded, we want to put them into the screen. So let's also create another function. Let's actually put it down here. Define next question. And basically what this function will do is it will see if the current question is less than 10, then it's going to increase question by 1, and then it's going to update all the labels and buttons. So let's update the question label .config. So this config function is basically what you use to update stuff in the label or in the object that you're modifying. So we want to modify the text. Let's make it equal to questions, and let's take the current question. Then let's get the question label, and let's also make the current question global. And another thing we need to do is change this current question to -1, because we want to call this next question the first thing, the first time we start the program. So it's going to be -1, then once it's going to add this one to the current question, it's going to be at 0. And we want to start from 0, so this makes sense. Now let's update the info label too. So info label config text. Let's make it equal to score plus, let's do str score, and then let's also add a question and it's going to be the current question, so str current question, and then let's also add this string over 10. So it's going to show the current question over 10. Now let's also update the options or the buttons. So for let's loop through the 4 numbers for I in range 4. So for each button in buttons, we wanna config update the text. So text is going to be equal to questions current question, and then options and then we want to get the option at I. So I think this basically just updates everything in the UI. Now if we call this function here, next question, then hopefully, well, let's call it after we define it actually, that makes more sense. Okay, let me just delete this. Now if I run, hopefully it will work. Okay, so it's telling us there's a problem. Okay, so the problem is that we set the current question after we set them here, so it's going to be an empty list unless we put the questions variable all up here. So now it's going to be filled once we call the load function. Now if we run again, then hopefully we'll have no problems. Okay, so we can see that everything is working perfectly. We have our buttons, our question, and the score label is actually not set right. We're going to correct that. And we're also going to set the command for each button. So let's just do that. So for the score label, or the info label, this is kind of strange actually. Oh yeah. When we modified it, it didn't have a new line, so that makes sense. Now let's take off these comments. Now let's set the commands for each button. And for that, we're basically going to define a new function. Let's call it check answer, and we're going to give it an answer as a string. And basically what this does is it will check if answer is equal to the current question's answer, correct answer. So we're going to get the current question, and then we're going to get the options. And for the options, we want to get the index of the correct answer. So we're going to call questions again, current question, and then let's call the answer. So this will return the index of the correct answer, and this will be in the options. So it will return the correct answer from the options. And if that's correct, then we add 1 to the score. So score plus equals 1. And of course, let's make the score global. And after it does that, it will call the next question. So next question. Now hopefully it will work. Let's run the program. Okay, so what is the capital of the city of France? It's Paris, of course. Okay, it's not changing, and that's because I think we didn't set the command in the buttons. So basically we need to go to so for each next question, we also need to set the command parameter, and it's going to be equal to a lambda expression that's going to have a text in it, and the text is basically going to be the same as the question text. So let's just define it as its own variable here, and let's put it both in the text here and in the lambda text. And then the lambda is just going to be for the check answer function. It's going to take the text as an input. So it's going to check if the text that's on the button, if it's correct, then it's going to add 1 to the score and go to the next question. If it's not correct, then it's not going to add anything to the score, but it's also going to go to the next question. So this is basically what's happening here. If we run again, then hopefully it will work. Okay, so which planet in our solar system is known as the red planet? I think that's Mars. Okay, so it switched to the next question and then it added 1 to the score. Let's choose something wrong here. So what is the largest mammal currently living on Earth? Let's choose, I don't know, a giraffe. Okay, that's wrong. You see, the score didn't go up. But if we just choose random answers, then you can see that in the last question, it's spitting out an error. And okay, I think I know why that's the case. I think the current question, yeah, we need to check if the next question is less than 10. That's when we're going to add 1. So that's the case where we go to the next question if we're not at the last question. If we're at the last question, then this is going to be false and it's not going to do anything. So if we run again now, then okay, so let's just choose random answers, see if the last question. Okay, so when we reach the last question here, so there's 2 problems actually. The question label is saying 9, and that's because we're starting from 0, so we need to add 1 to the question label. And the second thing is it's not showing the final frame. So let's just fix that. So for the info label, we're going to update it and add 1 to the current question. And basically for the final frame, the current question is going to reach the last one. So let's add an else statement here. So if we're not, or if we're at the last question, then this is going to be false, this one right here, and that's when we're going to call the final frame. So we're just going to call the final function, and the final is just going to remove the main frame, and it's going to show the final frame. I think I have the yeah, it's right here. So this is the final function. We also need to add another thing, which is the repeat function. And basically what it does is it will remove the final frame and it will show the main frame again, but it's going to load different questions. So let's just define repeat. And basically what it does is it forgets about the final frame dot back forget. Okay, can't even type. So, and then it's gonna load new questions, and it's also gonna set the score to 0, and then the current, okay, let me just remove this semicolon. The current question 2 is going to set it to -1, and let's make all of these global. And then it's going to call the next question, and then it's going to just back the mainframe. So we're just going to copy that. I think we wrote it somewhere here. Yeah, we're just going to copy this line and put it down here. So basically what the repeat function does, it forgets about the final frame, so it removes it from the root window, and then it loads. Actually, let's load first and then do that. And then it's going to set the score and the current question to their initial values. Then it's going to call next question, and it's going to pack the main frame. Let's add this repeat function to the button, to the repeat button. So we have the repeat button, I think, somewhere here. So repeat button, yeah. We're going to add a command parameter here, and let's give it repeat. I think that's it, actually. It's saying, I think the repeat function is not defined. Yeah, so let's put it above the code, so, or above the repeat question. So let's just put it with the final one. Now if we run, hopefully everything works fine. Okay, so let's just choose random answers to see if everything is working fine. Now we can see that the final frame is showing, but we forgot to set the final score. Let's just click on the repeat to see if it's working. So if we click on it, then it's going to take some time, because it all depends on the type of model you're using and also the speed of your internet. So you have to wait a little bit for it to load the new questions. Okay, let's just choose random answers. Alright, so we can see that the final score is showing. If we click the repeat again, then hopefully it will be a little fast now. Okay, we can see that it reloaded the questions. Let's just play for real now. So, who was the first president of the United States? I think this is George Washington. What does the acronym PDF stand for? Actually, I don't know this. I think I'm just gonna guess it. So, I think it's portable document format. Yeah, I'm gonna choose it. Okay, it's correct. Which sport is played with a shuttlecock? I don't know what that is. I don't know, maybe. I literally have no idea what a shuttlecock is. It kind of sounds kind of sus. I mean, I don't know. Just gonna choose something. No, I think it was correct. I don't remember the last score, so I don't know. Who is famously known as the King of Pop? I think this is Michael Jackson. What is the fastest land bird in the world? I think it's an ostrich. Yeah. I saw a short about this actually recently. So I'm pretty sure it's an ostrich. Yeah, it's correct. In which country did the pizza dish originate? The pizza. I don't know why I could pronounce it like that. I think it's Italy. Who is the Greek god of the sky and thunder? I think this is Zeus. Okay. What is the square root of the number 144? So, I think, so 10 is 100. The square of 10 is 100. The square of, square of 11 is gonna be something near 100. I'm just gonna choose 12. Okay, it's correct. I'm so lucky, man. who directed the 1975 thriller film Jaws. I think this is maybe Steven Spielberg. I don't think it's Hitchcock because he's kind of old, but it's in 75, so I'm not sure. I'm gonna choose Steven Spielberg just because it's a feeling. Okay, it's correct. Yeah. Now, which technology company created? I mean, obviously it's Samsung. I mean, it's the iPhone, so of course it's Samsung. Yeah, that was kind of stupid. So I think everything's working fine now. And that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to leave a comment down below. And that's pretty much it.